Before we get into the story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. The glass tower stretched 30 floors into the Manhattan skyline, its mirrored surface reflecting clouds that drifted lazily across the morning sun. Inside, the executive suite of Whitmore Industries hummed with quiet efficiency. Assistants moved soundlessly across marble floors, their heels clicking in perfect rhythm with the ticking of an antique clock mounted above the mahogany reception desk. Everything here screamed money, power, and the kind of success most people only dreamed about from behind their laptop screens in cramped apartments. Madison Hayes stood in the elevator, watching the floor numbers climb with a speed that matched her racing pulse. 23, 24, 25. Her palms were damp despite the Arctic air conditioning, and she clutched her worn leather portfolio so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She'd borrowed the navy blazer from her roommate, paired it with her only decent pencil skirt, and spent an hour that morning trying to tame her auburn hair into something resembling professional elegance. The result was adequate at best, but it would have to do. This interview was everything. Her last chance, really, after 6 months of rejections, overdue rent notices piling up on her kitchen counter, and the humiliating reality of moving back in with her mother if this didn't work out. Madison had a journalism degree from a state school, 3 years of experience writing for a struggling online magazine that paid in exposure rather than actual dollars, and exactly $217 in her checking account. She needed this job like she needed oxygen. The elevator dinged. 30th floor. Madison stepped out into a reception area that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought regular people were too poor to appreciate beauty. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Central Park, the trees below looking like miniature green sculptures. A blonde woman sat behind a curved white desk, her makeup so perfect it could have been airbrushed on, her smile so cold it could have frozen champagne. "Madison Hayes, I'm here for the junior editor position." Madison's voice came out steadier than she felt, which she counted as a small victory. The receptionist barely glanced up from her computer screen. "Mr. Whitmore's running behind. Take a seat." Go. Madison perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than her entire year's rent, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. She'd researched Carter Whitmore obsessively over the past week. 32 years old, CEO of a media empire he'd inherited from his father, and somehow managed not to destroy. Known for being brilliant, ruthless, and according to several anonymous Glassdoor reviews, an absolute nightmare to work for. The kind of man who fired people for breathing too loudly near his office. "He'll see you now." The receptionist's voice cut through Madison's spiraling thoughts. The double doors to the inner office swung open, and Madison walked through them like she was walking toward her own execution. The office was enormous, dominated by a desk the size of a small car, and the man sitting behind it. Carter Whitmore didn't bother looking up from his phone. He was exactly as handsome as his photos suggested, and somehow more intimidating in person, with dark hair styled with careless perfection, a charcoal suit that fit like it had been sewn directly onto his body, and an air of bored superiority that made Madison want to simultaneously impress him and punch him in his perfect jaw. "Sit." He gestured to a chair without raising his eyes from the screen. Madison sat, her spine rigid, her portfolio balanced on her knees like a shield. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Carter continued scrolling, his thumb moving with lazy indifference across the glass surface. Madison's initial nervousness began curdling into something sharper, irritation, then anger. "Mr. Whitmore, did I say you could speak?" His voice was smooth, cultured, and dripping with the kind of condescension that came from never having been told no in his entire privileged life. Madison's jaw tightened. She needed this job. She needed this job. She needed this job. The mantra repeated in her head like a prayer, but it was losing its power with every second of silence that stretched between them. Finally, Carter looked up. His eyes were a cold gray, assessing her with all the warmth of a scientist examining a particularly uninteresting bacterium under a microscope. Madison Hayes, state school journalism degree, 3 years writing fluff pieces about celebrity diets and budget travel tips for a website nobody reads. Tell me, why exactly should I waste my time with you? The words hit like slaps, each one carefully calculated to sting. Madison had prepared for tough questions, for challenging her qualifications, for having to prove herself. But she hadn't prepared for this, for being treated like she was less than human before she'd even had a chance to speak. Let me guess, Carter interrupted, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that made Madison's blood pressure spike. You're passionate about journalism. You're a hard worker. You're eager to learn. Did I miss anything? Or does that cover the generic speech you've been rehearsing in your head since you walked in? Something inside Madison snapped. Maybe it was the 6 months of rejection. Maybe it was the overdue rent and the ramen she'd been eating for dinner 4 nights a week. Maybe it was the way he looked at her like she was nothing, like her entire existence was an inconvenience to his busy schedule of being rich and insufferable. She stood up so fast, the chair scraped against the floor. You know what? You're right. I do have a degree from a state school, because unlike some people, I didn't have a trust fund to pay for an Ivy League education. I did write about celebrity diets, because that's what kept the lights on while I was trying to build a career in an industry that chews up and spits out anyone without connections. And yes, I am passionate about journalism, which apparently makes me naive in your world of corporate cynicism and inherited wealth. Carter's eyebrows rose slightly, the first sign that she'd surprised him. Madison wasn't finished. But here's what you didn't ask. You didn't ask about the investigative piece I wrote that exposed a local politician's corruption and got picked up by the Associated Press. You didn't ask about the fact that I taught myself data journalism and can build interactive graphics that make complex stories accessible to actual human beings. You didn't ask anything that would actually determine whether I'm qualified for this position, because you'd already decided I wasn't worth your time the second you saw my resume. Her hand moved before her brain could stop it. The slap connected of Carter's cheek with a crack that echoed through the cavernous office like a gunshot. For a moment, the entire world seemed to freeze. Madison stared at her own hand, as if it belonged to someone else, her palm stinging from the impact. Carter Whitmore sat motionless, his head turned slightly from the force of the slap, a red handprint blooming across his left cheek like a brand. The only sound was the quiet hum of the air conditioning and Madison's ragged breathing. Oh God. Oh God. What had she done? Madison's survival instincts finally kicked in. She grabbed her portfolio and spun toward the door, her heels catching on the expensive carpet in her haste to escape before security arrived to escort her out. Or before the police arrived to arrest her for assault. Could you go to jail for slapping a billionaire? Probably. Rich people had lawyers for things like this. She'd made it 3 steps when Carter's voice stopped her cold. Wait. Madison froze, her hand on the door handle, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She turned slowly, expecting to see fury on his face. Instead, Carter was touching his cheek with an expression of something that looked almost like wonder, or maybe amusement. It was hard to tell with his face half hidden behind his hand. Nobody, he said slowly, lowering his hand to reveal a smile that transformed his entire face from coldly handsome to devastatingly attractive, has ever slapped me before. Madison swallowed hard. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. That was completely unprofessional, and Sit down. I should really, Miss Hayes, sit down. This time his voice carried a note of command that made her legs move before her brain could override them. Madison sank back into the chair, clutching her portfolio like it might shield her from whatever was about to happen. Carter leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his gray eyes now bright with something that looked disturbingly like interest. "Tell me about the corruption story." Madison blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "The politician." "The investigation. You said it got picked up by the AP. Tell me about it." Her brain scrambled to switch gears from panic to professional. It was a city councilman in my hometown. I noticed discrepancies in public records, followed the money trail, found out he was funneling taxpayer funds into his brother's construction company. It took me 4 months of digging through documents and interviewing sources, but I had enough evidence to prove it. And the data journalism skills? Self-taught. I took online courses, practiced with public data sets, learned Python and R for analysis. Modern journalism isn't just about writing anymore. You need to be able to tell stories with numbers, make information visual and engaging. Carter nodded slowly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "How would you feel about a different position than the one you applied for?" Madison's stomach dropped. Here it came, the part where he had her blacklisted from every media company in the city. "Listen, Mr. Whitmore, I really am sorry about the slap. I was completely out of line and I need a fiancé." Madison's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. "Not a real one," Carter continued, as if he'd just asked her about her thoughts on the weather, rather than dropped an absolutely insane statement into the conversation. "A fake one, for appearances. 6 months, maybe less if things work out according to plan. You'd attend events with me, play the part of the devoted partner, convince my board of directors and various business associates that I'm a stable, committed man ready to take over my father's company permanently." "You're joking." Madison finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Carter's expression was deadly serious now, all traces of amusement gone. "My board thinks I'm too young and too reckless to run this company without supervision. They want to see maturity, stability, a man who's settled down and ready to put the company first. My father's will stipulates that I have to maintain the board's confidence, or they can vote to install an outside CEO. I've spent the last 4 years building this company into something more than just my father's legacy, and I'm not about to let a bunch of old men in suits take it away because they think I party too much and date too many models." Madison's head was spinning. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to girls from Ohio with state school degrees and $200 in their checking account. Why me? You could hire any actress, any model, anyone who's actually trained to play a part like this. Because actresses and models talk to tabloids, because people in my circle would see through a professional in seconds, because— Carter paused, something flickering across his face that might have been respect. "Because someone who's brave enough or stupid enough to slap me in my own office is someone who might actually be able to pull this off." "You're real, Miss Hayes. Refreshingly, brutally real. And that's exactly what I need. This is insane. This is business. I'm offering you a contract. 6 months, playing the role of my fiancé. In return, you'll receive a salary of $15,000 a month, a fully furnished apartment in a building I own, a wardrobe appropriate for someone in my social circle, and at the end of the 6 months, a glowing recommendation and enough connections in the media industry to write your own ticket anywhere you want to go." Madison did the math in her head. $15,000 a month for 6 months. $90,000. That was more money than she'd made in the past 3 years combined. That was paying off her student loans, building a savings account, never having to eat ramen for dinner. Again, money. "And if I say no?" Carter shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Then you walk out that door and we both forget this conversation ever happened. Though I should mention that I tend to hold grudges, and my memory is excellent when it comes to people who've assaulted me in my own office. That's blackmail. That's motivation." His smile was sharp as broken glass. "What's it going to be, Miss Hayes? 6 months of pretending to love me? Or 6 more months of rejection letters and instant ramen?" Madison's mind raced. This was crazy. Completely, utterly insane. Fake relationships only happened in movies and romance novels, not in real life. Not to real people. And yet here was Carter Whitmore, billionaire CEO, offering her more money than she'd ever dreamed of to essentially be an actress in his corporate theater production. She thought about her overdue rent, about the calls from her mother asking when she was going to give up and come home, about the journalism career she'd worked so hard for, slipping through her fingers like sand, about the fact that in about 3 weeks she'd be sleeping on her childhood bed, surrounded by posters of boy bands she'd loved in high school, her dreams of being a real journalist, nothing but a punchline at family dinners. "I want $20,000 a month," Madison heard herself say, "and a contract that specifies exactly what's required of me, with boundaries clearly defined. And if you try anything inappropriate, the deal's off and I keep whatever money I've earned up to that point." Carter's smile widened. "Counteroffer, $18,000 a month, contract with clearly defined boundaries. Anything inappropriate, as you put it, requires mutual consent. And you'll find that I'm many things, Miss Hayes, but a predator isn't one of them. This is a business arrangement, nothing more." Madison extended her hand across the desk, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. "Deal." Carter's hand closed around hers, warm and firm, and somehow sending an electric current up her arm that she absolutely refused to acknowledge. "Welcome aboard, Fiancée. Try not to slap me again in public. The media would have a field day." The contract arrived at Madison's apartment by courier the next morning, delivered by a man in a suit so expensive it probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. She signed for it, closed the door, and stood in the middle of her tiny studio, staring at the thick manila envelope like it might explode. Her roommate, Claire, emerged from behind the divider that separated their sleeping areas, wrapped in a bathrobe with her hair in a messy bun. "Please tell me that's not an eviction notice," Claire said, pouring herself coffee from the pot Madison had made an hour earlier. "It's worse." Madison opened the envelope and pulled out a document that had to be at least 50 pages long. "It's a contract to be a billionaire's fake fiancé for 6 months," Claire choked on her coffee. "I'm sorry, what?" Madison spent the next 20 minutes explaining the entire surreal situation, while Claire's expression cycled through disbelief, shock, concern, and finally settling on something that looked like cautious excitement. By the time Madison finished, the coffee had gone cold, and they'd both moved to sit on Madison's bed, the contract spread between them like evidence of an elaborate prank. "Maddie, this is insane," Claire said, flipping through pages of dense legal language. "This is actually, legitimately insane." "I know." "He's offering you $18,000 a month to pretend to be his girlfriend. Fiancé, technically." "Oh, well, that makes it totally normal then." Claire looked up, her eyes serious. "Are you actually considering this?" Madison thought about the rent check she needed to write in 4 days, the one she didn't have money for. About the rejection email she'd gotten that morning from yet another media company, telling her they'd gone with someone more experienced. About the way Carter Whitmore had looked at her after she slapped him, like she'd finally become visible instead of just another resume in a stack. "I already signed it," Madison admitted quietly. Claire's eyes widened. "You what?" "I signed it. Last night. Took photos of every page, sent them to myself, signed it, and had it ready for the courier this morning." Madison pulled her knees to her chest. "Claire, I'm drowning. I'm so far underwater I can't even see the surface anymore. This is a life raft. Maybe it's a crazy life raft that might be on fire, but it's still a way out. Claire was quiet for a long moment, then reached over and squeezed Madison's hand. Okay. If you're doing this, then we're doing this smart. First, you're going to read every single word of that contract and make sure there's nothing that could screw you over. Second, you're going to set boundaries and stick to them no matter how charming or manipulative this billionaire asshole gets. And third, she grinned suddenly, you're going to tell me every single detail, because this is the most exciting thing that's happened to either of us in years. The phone call came at precisely 9 a.m. the following Monday. Madison, who'd spent the weekend alternatively panicking and researching everything she could find about Carter Whitmore, answered on the second ring. Miss Hayes. Carter's voice was crisp, professional, giving no indication that he'd recently hired someone who'd physically assaulted him. A car will pick you up at 11. We're going shopping. Shopping? Madison pulled the phone away from her ear to check the time. 2 hours. She was in sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, her hair still wet from the shower. Your wardrobe needs an upgrade if you're going to be seen in public with me. I'm assuming you don't own a gown suitable for the charity gala we're attending Friday night. I own exactly one dress that isn't from a thrift store, and it has a coffee stain on the hem that won't come out. Perfect. 11 o'clock, Miss Hayes. Don't be late. He hung up before she could respond. Madison stared at her phone, then at her closet, then back at her phone. What have I gotten myself into? The car that arrived at 11 was a sleek black sedan, with windows tinted so dark they were probably illegal. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a professional demeanor, opened the door for her without comment on her jeans and blazer combination. Madison had done the best she could with 2 hours' notice, but she still felt underdressed as they pulled away from her building and headed into Manhattan's shopping district. Carter was waiting outside a boutique on Fifth Avenue, checking his watch with an expression of mild irritation. He wore dark jeans that probably cost more than Madison's monthly rent and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking like he'd just stepped out of a cologne advertisement. Madison hated how good he looked. Hated it. You're late, he said as she approached. You said 11. It's 11:03. In my world, if you're not early, you're late. Carter gestured toward the boutique's gleaming glass doors. Shall we? The next 4 hours were a blur of fabric, measurements, fashion consultants, appearing and disappearing like helpful ghosts, and price tags that made Madison's stomach hurt. Carter sat in a leather chair like a king holding court, occasionally nodding approval or shaking his head in dismissal as Madison tried on, outfit after outfit. Evening gowns, cocktail dresses, business attire, casual wear that was somehow more expensive than formal wear. Shoes, bags, jewelry that sparkled under the boutique's strategic lighting. This is too much, Madison protested after the 8th gown, a deep emerald creation that hugged her curves in ways that made her acutely self-conscious. I don't need all of this. Yes, you do. Carter stood, circling her slowly, his eyes assessing with the same clinical detachment he'd shown in his office. If you're going to be my fiancée, you need to look the part. That means looking like you belong in the rooms we'll be entering, with the people we'll be meeting. This isn't charity, Miss Hayes. It's investment in the illusion we're selling. I feel like a doll. You look beautiful. The words were delivered in the same matter-of-fact tone he'd used to discuss contracts, but they still sent an unwelcome flutter through Madison's chest. We'll take this one, and the blue one, and the black one with the... He waved his hand vaguely. The thing on the shoulder. The consultant beamed. Excellent choices, Mr. Whitmore. By the time they finished, Madison had acquired a wardrobe worth more than her car. The boutique arranged for everything to be delivered to the address Carter provided, an apartment building in Tribeca that Madison had walked past countless times, never imagining she'd actually live there. "Hungry?" Carter asked, as they stepped back onto the street, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Madison's stomach growled in response. She'd been too nervous to eat breakfast. "I'll take that as a yes." Carter's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, and typed a quick response. "There's a restaurant 2 blocks from here. Italian." "You like Italian?" "I like food that isn't ramen, so yes." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Low bar, but I'll work with it." The restaurant was small, intimate, the kind of place that didn't advertise because everyone who mattered already knew about it. The host greeted Carter by name and led them to a corner booth, with enough privacy that they could talk without being overheard. Madison slid into her seat, acutely aware that she was probably the least expensive thing in the room, despite the designer jeans and silk blouse Carter had insisted she wear out of the boutique. "So," Carter said once they'd ordered, his gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. "Tell me about Madison Hayes, the real one, not the resume version." "Why do you care?" "Because if we're going to convince people we're in love, I need to know enough about you to make it believable. Where you grew up, what your family's like, how we supposedly met. The details are what make or break a good story." Madison took a sip of water, buying time. "I grew up in a small town in Ohio. My mom's a teacher. My dad left when I was 8. I have one younger brother who's in the military. I came to New York 5 years ago because I thought I could make it as a journalist if I just worked hard enough." She laughed, the sound bitter. "Turns out hard work isn't always enough." Carter nodded slowly. "And relationships? Anyone I need to know about? Ex-boyfriend, who might sell our fake engagement story to the tabloids?" "No. My last relationship ended 2 years ago. He wanted me to move back to Ohio with him. I wanted to stay in New York. We wanted different things." Madison paused. "What about you? How do we explain your sudden engagement to someone nobody's ever heard of?" "We tell them the truth, mostly. You came to interview for a position at my company. I was impressed by your intelligence and your fire. We started talking. One thing led to another, and I realized I'd found someone real in a city full of fakes and social climbers. It's close enough to the truth that it'll be easy to remember. Except the part where I slapped you." Carter's lips curved into that dangerous smile. "Especially that part. Though maybe we keep that detail between us." Their food arrived, and they ate in relative silence, the weight of what they were about to do settling over both of them. Madison pushed pasta around her plate, her appetite fading as reality set in. In 3 days, she'd be attending a charity gala as Carter Whitmore's fiancée. In 3 days, she'd be stepping into a world she'd only ever observed from the outside, armed with nothing but a contract and a wardrobe full of borrowed confidence. "Having second thoughts?" Carter asked, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. Madison looked up, meeting his eyes. "Terrified thoughts." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers for just a moment. "We can do this, Miss Hayes. Just follow my lead." The apartment Carter provided was on the 23rd floor of a building, so modern it looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the Hudson River. The furniture was all clean lines and neutral colors, and the kitchen had appliances Madison didn't even know existed. She walked through it in a daze, touching surfaces like she was afraid they might disappear if she pressed too hard. "This is mine?" she asked the building manager who'd given her the keys and the security codes, and about 15 minutes of instructions she'd mostly forgotten. "For the duration of your lease agreement with Mr. Whitmore, yes. If you need anything, maintenance is available 24 hours a day. The concierge can help with dry cleaning, restaurant reservations, or any other services you might require." Services she might require? Madison almost laughed. A week ago, The most luxurious service she'd used was the laundromat's wash and fold option. Now she had a concierge. The manager left, and Madison stood in the center of the living room, slowly turning in a circle. The silence was different here. In her old studio, she could hear Claire's breathing through the thin divider, could hear the couple upstairs arguing, could hear traffic and sirens, and the constant hum of the city pushing its way through inadequate windows. Here, the silence was thick, expensive, the kind that came from proper insulation and architectural design that cost more per square foot than most people made in a year. Her phone buzzed. A text from Carter. "Gala is Friday. Car will pick you up at 6. Wear the emerald dress and practice your smile. You'll need it." Madison looked at herself in the reflection of the darkened TV screen, practiced smiling. It felt fake, forced, like a mask she was learning to wear. She tried again, thinking about things that genuinely made her happy. Her brother's laugh, the first snowfall of winter. The moment when a story she was writing finally clicked into place. The smile that appeared this time was softer, more real. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Claire. "OMG, I need details. Is the apartment amazing? Have you jumped on the bed yet? Is there a doorman? Tell me everything." Madison spent the next hour on video call with Claire, giving her a full tour of the apartment, while Claire squealed and made increasingly ridiculous suggestions for what Madison should do with all the space. By the time they hung up, Madison felt a little more grounded, a little less like she'd been dropped into someone else's life by accident. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. A stylist arrived to discuss hair and makeup for the gala. A media consultant spent 4 hours coaching Madison on how to handle questions from reporters, what to say, what not to say, how to deflect without seeming rude. Carter's assistant, a terrifyingly efficient woman named Patricia, delivered a thick packet of information about the other attendees at the gala, who they were, what companies they ran, what charitable causes they supported, who was sleeping with whom, and who was feuding with whom, and basically a crash course in the social dynamics of Manhattan's elite. Madison studied the packet like she was cramming for a final exam. She made flashcards. She practiced names and faces until she could recognize the major players on site. She read every article she could find about charity galas, about how to navigate high society events, about the kind of small talk that seemed meaningless but was actually a delicate dance of power and positioning. By Thursday night, she felt like she'd learned an entirely new language and was about to take a test in it without a dictionary. Friday arrived with the kind of beautiful weather that seemed designed to mock Madison's internal panic. The stylist returned at 3, armed with an arsenal of beauty products and a confidence that Madison desperately wished she could borrow. By 5:30, Madison barely recognized herself in the mirror. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Her makeup was subtle, but somehow made her eyes look twice their normal size, and the emerald dress fit like it had been designed specifically for her body. "You look stunning," the stylist said, packing up her supplies. "Mr. Whitmore is a lucky man." "It's not," Madison started, then stopped. Right. It was real now, or at least it had to look real. "Thank you." The car arrived at precisely 6 o'clock. Madison grabbed her clutch, a small silver thing that barely held her phone and lipstick, and headed downstairs, her heels clicking against the marble floor of the lobby. The doorman nodded respectfully as she passed, and Madison felt like she was play acting. Like any second, someone would call out that there'd been a mistake, that girls from Ohio didn't get to wear emerald gowns and ride in black sedans to charity galas. Carter was already in the car when she slid into the back seat. He looked devastating in a tuxedo, his hair perfectly styled, his expression unreadable as his eyes swept over her. "You clean up well, Miss Hayes. You're not so bad yourself, Mr. Whitmore." Madison was proud of how steady her voice sounded, how she managed to meet his gaze without flinching. "Ready for this?" "Absolutely not." Carter's lips twitched. Honesty. I appreciate that. Just remember what Patricia told you. Smile. Be charming. Let me handle the difficult questions. And for God's sake, don't slap anyone. That was one time, Madison muttered. One time that got you into this situation. I'd say it was pretty memorable. The gala was being held at a museum on the Upper East Side, the kind of building that looked like a Greek temple and probably had more security than a small nation. As the car pulled up to the red carpet, there was an actual red carpet, Madison noted with a surge of panic. She could see camera flashes, reporters calling out questions, beautiful people in beautiful clothes streaming through the entrance like a river of silk and diamonds. Last chance to back out, Carter said quietly. Madison took a deep breath. I signed a contract. I keep my word. Good. Carter's hand found hers, warm and solid. Then let's give them a show. The door opened. Sound rushed in, cameras clicking, voices calling, music drifting from inside the museum. Carter stepped out first, then turned back to offer Madison his hand. She took it, letting him help her out of the car with a grace she didn't feel. The cameras immediately swiveled toward them, and Madison did what Patricia had taught her. Smiled, stood close to Carter, let him guide her with a hand at the small of her back. Mr. Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore, who's your date? Carter. Over here, give us a smile. Is this your girlfriend? How long have you been together? Carter stopped, turning toward the cameras with the easy confidence of someone who'd been doing this his entire life. He pulled Madison closer, his arm sliding around her waist in a gesture that looked natural, possessive, real. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Madison Hayes, my fiancée. The cameras exploded in a frenzy of flashes and shouted questions. Madison's smile froze on her face. Fiancée. He'd said fiancée. To the press, to cameras that were recording every word, every expression, every moment of this absolutely insane situation she'd agreed to. How did you propose? When's the wedding? Madison, how does it feel to be engaged to one of New York's most eligible bachelors? Carter leaned down, his lips brushing her ear in a gesture that would look intimate to anyone watching. Breathe, he whispered. You're doing fine. Madison forced herself to relax, to lean into him like this was real, like she was actually in love with this impossible man. She let Carter field the questions, offering only small smiles and the occasional, I'm very happy, when a reporter addressed her directly. After what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, Carter guided her past the press line and into the museum's grand entrance hall. You survived, he murmured, accepting champagne flutes from a passing waiter and handing one to Madison. Well done. Madison took a large gulp of champagne, ignoring the looks from nearby guests who were sipping their drinks with considerably more restraint. You told them we're engaged. The contract said dating, maybe engaged if necessary. That was not necessary. Actually, it was. The board has been pressuring me to settle down. An engagement is more serious than just dating, more likely to convince them I'm ready for the responsibility they want to see. Carter's eyes scanned the room, cataloging faces, calculating approaches. Besides, being engaged gives us a clear timeline. 6 months, a broken engagement, everyone moves on. Simple. Nothing about this is simple. True. But we're committed now. So smile, darling fiancé. We have about 100 people to charm tonight. The next 2 hours were exhausting in ways Madison hadn't anticipated. Every conversation was a performance. Every smile had to be genuine enough to convince. Every time Carter touched her, his hand on her back, his fingers intertwining with hers, his lips brushing her temple. She had to remember it was fake, just part of the show, even as her traitorous body responded with little electric shocks of awareness. They talked to board members, to business associates, to other socialites who looked at Madison with thinly veiled curiosity and some with outright skepticism. She fielded questions about how they met with the story they'd practiced, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, and pretended to be fascinated by conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes in the Hamptons. "You're doing remarkably well," a woman's voice said from behind her. Madison turned to find a statuesque blonde in a red dress that probably violated several laws of physics. "I'm Victoria Sterling, old friend of Carter's." The way she said "old friend" made it clear she meant something more. Madison's journalist instincts kicked in immediately, reading the possessive body language, the way Victoria's eyes tracked Carter across the room. "Madison Hayes. Nice to meet you." Madison extended her hand, which Victoria took with a grip just firm enough to be a challenge. "So you're the mystery woman who finally captured Carter's attention. I have to say, I'm surprised. You're not his usual type." "Lucky for me, then." Madison kept her smile pleasant, but her eyes were sharp. "I'd hate to be predictable." Victoria laughed, a sound like ice cubes in crystal. "Oh, I like you." How refreshing to meet someone with a spine in this crowd. "Tell me, how did you two really meet? The interview story is charming, but a bit too convenient, don't you think?" Madison felt Carter's presence before she saw him, his hand sliding around her waist in a gesture that had already become familiar. "Victoria, always a pleasure." "Carter." Victoria's smile was sharp. "I was just getting to know your fiancée. She's quite different from Alessandra. Alessandra and I ended things 6 months ago. Ancient history." Carter's voice was pleasant, but Madison felt the tension in his body. "Of course, I just think it's interesting how quickly you've moved on. Some might say suspiciously quickly." Victoria's eyes glinted with something predatory. "But then, you always were good at surprising people." Before Madison could formulate a response, a gong sounded, signaling that dinner was about to be served. Carter used the distraction to guide Madison away, his hand firm at her back. "Ex-girlfriend?" Madison asked once they were out of Victoria's earshot. "More like a mistake I made at a New Year's party 3 years ago that she refuses to let me forget." Carter's jaw was tight. "She's on the board, unfortunately. Her father owns 30% of the company's stock, which means we need to be extra convincing around her." They were seated at a table with 6 other guests, including one of Carter's board members, a man in his 60s, with impressive eyebrows and a skeptical expression that seemed permanently etched onto his face. The conversation flowed around topics Madison had crammed into her brain over the past few days: the latest Broadway show, the upcoming election, concerns about the market. She contributed where she could, mostly listened, and tried to ignore the way Carter's hand occasionally found hers under the table, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm that absolutely did not make her shiver. So Madison, the board member, whose name was Harrison Caldwell, addressed her directly. "Carter tells me you're a journalist. What's your beat?" "Investigative reporting, mostly. I'm interested in stories about corruption, inequality, systems that need to be exposed and changed." Madison took a sip of wine, grateful for something to do with her hands. "How noble." Caldwell's tone suggested he found it anything but. "And how does someone with such idealistic pursuits reconcile being engaged to a CEO of a major corporation? Aren't we the enemy in your world?" The table went quiet. Madison felt Carter tense beside her, could sense him about to intervene. She placed her hand on his thigh under the table, a gentle warning to let her handle this. "I don't believe in enemies, Mr. Caldwell. I believe in accountability. Some corporations abuse their power, yes, but some use their resources to create positive change. The difference is in the leadership." She turned to Carter, letting real warmth enter her eyes. Carter's vision for Whitmore Industries isn't just about profit margins. He's invested in sustainable practices, fair wages, community development. That's the kind of corporate leadership I can support. It was partially true. Madison had researched Carter's business practices and been surprised to find he wasn't the typical heartless billionaire the media sometimes portrayed. But the way she said it, with conviction and sincerity, sold it as something more than facts. It sold it as love. Caldwell studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. The rest of dinner passed more smoothly. By the time dessert was served, Madison felt like she'd run a marathon, her face aching from maintaining a pleasant expression. When Carter suggested they step out onto the terrace for air, she agreed immediately. The terrace overlooked Central Park, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of stars. The night air was cool against Madison's bare shoulders, and she breathed deeply, grateful for the break from performance. "You were brilliant in there," Carter said, leaning against the balustrade. That response to Caldwell, that was exactly what he needed to hear. "Was it true? What I said about your business practices?" "Mostly. I'm not a saint, Madison. I make decisions that benefit the company first. But yes, I believe corporations have a responsibility beyond just making money for shareholders." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Why do you ask?" "Because if I'm going to lie about being in love with you, I'd prefer if at least some of what I say has truth behind it. Makes it easier to sell." Carter moved closer, and Madison's breath caught. He was too close, close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of lighter gray in his eyes. And what if it's not all lies? "What?" Madison's voice came out as barely a whisper. "What if I'm not entirely pretending?" His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything she knew about him. "What if this arrangement is becoming more complicated than either of us intended?" Madison's heart hammered. This was the champagne talking, or the moonlight, or the stress of the evening. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. "Carter, I know this is supposed to be fake, but you have to admit, there's something here. Some kind of chemistry that's going to make the next 6 months either very easy or very difficult." Madison stepped back, breaking the contact. "This is a business arrangement. That's all it can be." Of course, Carter's expression shuddered, the wall coming back up. "You're right. I apologize. The evening has been longer than expected. We should probably make an appearance for a few more minutes. Then I'll have the car take you home." They returned to the gala, but something had shifted. The touches felt more careful now, more calculated. The smiles were more forced. By the time they left an hour later, Madison's head was pounding and her feet ached from the heels. In the car, they sat in silence, the city passing by the windows in streams of light. Carter was on his phone, typing messages with quick, efficient movements. Madison stared out the window, her mind replaying the conversation on the terrace, analyzing every word, every look, trying to understand what had just happened. When the car pulled up to her building, Carter finally looked up. "You did well tonight. Really well. The board will be pleased." "Good. That's what you're paying me for." Madison reached for the door handle. "Madison." His voice stopped her. She turned back. "About what I said on the terrace, it's forgotten. We were playing a role. Sometimes roles blur with reality. It doesn't mean anything." Something flickered across Carter's face, too quick to read. "Right, of course. Good night, Miss Hayes." "Good night, Mr. Whitmore." Madison escaped into the building, her emotions a tangled mess she didn't have the energy to sort through. The apartment felt too large, too empty when she stepped inside. She kicked off the heels, unzipped the dress, and stood in the bathroom in her underwear, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was flawless. Professional makeup, perfect hair, the kind of beauty that came from expensive stylists and good lighting. But underneath, Madison could see the truth. She was tired, scared, and dangerously close to forgetting that everything about tonight had been fake. Her phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "How was it? Are you secretly in love yet?" Madison typed back, "It's not real. None of it is real." But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of her borrowed apartment, wearing borrowed clothes, living a borrowed life, she couldn't quite convince herself that was entirely true. The next morning brought consequences. Madison woke to her phone exploding with notifications. She'd been tagged in dozens of photos from the gala, pictures of her and Carter that looked like they'd been taken by professional photographers. In every image, they looked perfect together. His hand on her back, her leaning into him. A moment on the terrace when he'd been touching her face, the camera capturing what looked like an incredibly intimate moment between two people in love. The headlines were predictable. Carter, Whitmore engaged. Mystery woman captures billionaire's heart. Who is Madison Hayes? But it was the comments that made Madison's stomach churn. Dozens of people speculating about who she was, where she came from, whether she was a gold digger, whether the relationship was real. Some were supportive. Many were cruel. All of them felt invasive, like strangers dissecting her life for entertainment. A text from Carter. "Don't read the comments. They don't know you. They don't matter." How did you know I was reading comments? Because that's what normal people do. I have 15 years of practice ignoring them. Trust me, it's better for your sanity. Madison set the phone down and forced herself to get up, to make coffee, to pretend this was a normal Saturday morning. But nothing about her life was normal anymore. She'd signed away 6 months to live in a world that wasn't hers, pretending to be someone she wasn't, all for money that felt increasingly like it might not be worth the cost. Her phone rang. "Carter, we need to have dinner tomorrow night," he said without preamble. "Victoria's hosting a small gathering at her place. Board members will be there. Our presence is required." "How small?" "Intimate. Maybe 20 people. Casual clothes, but make it expensive casual. You know what I mean." "Not really, but I'll figure it out. Patricia will send over options. Madison," he paused. "About last night. On the terrace. That wasn't appropriate. This is business, and I need to maintain professional boundaries. It won't happen again." "Okay." Madison wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or disappointed. She settled on, confused. "I'll pick you up at 7 tomorrow. Try to get some rest. You're about to discover that being engaged to me means your social calendar is no longer your own." He hung up before she could respond. Madison stared at the phone, then at the city spread out before her windows. She'd wanted a different life, wanted to escape the cycle of rejection and failure that had defined her past year. She'd gotten her wish. She just hadn't realized how much of herself she'd have to lose in the process. Victoria Sterling's penthouse was exactly what Madison expected. All glass and steel and modern art that probably cost more than Madison's childhood home. The gathering was already in full swing when Carter and Madison arrived, fashionably late, in a way that seemed calculated to make an entrance. Madison wore designer jeans that fit like a second skin, paired with a silk blouse and heels that added 3 inches to her height. Expensive, casual, just like Carter had requested. "Remember," Carter murmured as they rode the elevator to the top floor, "Victoria's going to try to get under your skin. Don't let her. We just need to make it through tonight. Show the board we're stable and committed, and we can go home." "Why do I feel like I'm about to walk into a battlefield?" "Because you are. High society is all about subtle warfare." Carter's hand found the small of her back as the elevator doors opened. Just stay close to me." Victoria greeted them at the door, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Carter, Madison, so glad you could make it. Come in, come in. Everyone's dying to meet the woman who finally tamed our bachelor." The apartment was filled with the same crowd from the gala, plus a few faces Madison didn't recognize. She accepted a glass of wine from a server and let Carter guide her through the room, making small talk, laughing at jokes, playing the role of devoted fiancée. It was getting easier, she realized. The smiles came more naturally now. The touches didn't feel as foreign. She was adapting to the performance, learning the rhythms of this strange new dance. "So, Madison," Victoria appeared at her elbow when Carter was pulled away by Harrison Caldwell for what looked like a serious business discussion. "Tell me, how does it feel to go from unknown journalist to Billionaire's fiancé practically overnight?" Madison turned to face her, keeping her expression pleasant. "It feels surreal, honestly. But Carter and I connected on a level that transcended our different backgrounds. Sometimes love doesn't follow a logical timeline." "Love? How quaint." Victoria sipped her martini. "You know, Carter has dated a lot of women. Models, actresses, heiresses. Women who understand his world. I'm just curious what makes you different. Maybe the fact that I don't come from his world is exactly what makes me right for him." Madison met Victoria's gaze steadily. "He has plenty of people who tell him what he wants to hear. Maybe he needed someone who'd tell him the truth." "Is that what you do? Tell him the truth?" Victoria's smile sharpened. "Or do you tell him whatever you think will keep you in designer clothes and penthouses?" Madison felt her temper flare, the same anger that had led to slapping Carter in his office. She took a breath, forced it down. "I don't expect you to understand my relationship with Carter. You don't know me, and you clearly have your own history with him. But I'm not going anywhere, Victoria. So you can either accept that, or you can keep trying to undermine me and fail. Your choice." For a moment, something like respect flickered in Victoria's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual cold amusement. "Maybe you're not as naive as I thought. We'll see how long you last." She glided away, leaving Madison alone near the window. Madison's hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline coursing through her system from the confrontation. She'd stood up to Victoria, hadn't let herself be intimidated. But the encounter left her unsettled, reminded her that this world had rules she was still learning. Predators she hadn't learned to recognize yet. "Everything okay?" Carter appeared beside her, his eyes searching her face. "Victoria and I had a chat. She's not subtle about her dislike. She's not subtle about anything. It's one of her more exhausting qualities." Carter's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "You handled her well. I was watching. You were supposed to be talking to Caldwell. I can do both. Multitasking is a crucial CEO skill." His thumb traced circles on her palm again, that gesture that seemed to short-circuit her brain. "Come on. There's someone I want you to meet." He led her to an older woman holding court on a velvet sofa, surrounded by several guests who hung on her every word. She had silver hair styled in an elegant chignon, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of bone structure that suggested she'd been beautiful her entire life. "Madison, this is Eleanor Whitmore, my grandmother." Madison's brain stuttered. "Your grandmother?" I thought. The packet Patricia gave me said that my father was an only child who built the business from nothing. True. Eleanor is my mother's mother. She and my father despised each other, but she's been a force in New York society for 40 years. And she insisted on meeting you." Carter's expression was unreadable. Eleanor extended a hand, adorned with rings that probably had their own insurance policies. "So you're the girl who captured my grandson's attention. Sit down, dear. Let me look at you properly." Madison sat, acutely aware of being assessed by someone who'd probably seen every type of social climber and gold digger that New York had to offer. Eleanor studied her in silence for a long moment, then smiled, the expression transforming her face from intimidating to warm. "You're nervous. Good. That means you're smart enough to be scared." Eleanor patted Madison's hand. "Carter, fetch me another drink. I want to talk to your fiancé alone." Carter looked like he wanted to protest, but Eleanor's gaze silenced him. He disappeared toward the bar, leaving Madison alone with his grandmother. "So," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a more intimate level. "Tell me the truth, dear. Is this engagement real, or is my grandson playing one of his chess games?" Madison's heart stopped. What makes you think I've been alive for 78 years? I've seen every scheme, every plot, every desperate maneuver the wealthy make to hold on to their power. And I know my grandson. He's brilliant, but he's also been taught that everything is a transaction, that relationships are tools to be used strategically. Eleanor's eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "So I'll ask again, is this real?" Madison made a split-second decision. Something about Eleanor's directness, her obvious intelligence, made lying seem pointless. "It started as an arrangement, but it's becoming something I don't quite understand yet." Eleanor nodded, seeming satisfied with the honesty. "At least you're not insulting my intelligence by pretending to be madly in love. That's refreshing. Tell me, Madison Hayes, what do you want from my grandson?" "Right now?" "To survive the next 6 months without completely losing myself." "Honest again. I like you." Eleanor leaned back. "Let me give you some advice, dear. Carter was raised by a father who believed emotions were weaknesses. He's been taught to control everything, including his own heart. If this arrangement of yours is going to become real, and I suspect it already is, whether either of you admits it, you're going to have to be patient. You're going to have to be strong, and you're going to have to show him that vulnerability isn't the same thing as weakness. What if I'm not strong enough? Then you wouldn't have slapped him in his office." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Oh yes, dear. He told me about that. Said it was the most honest thing anyone had done to him in years." Carter returned with Eleanor's drink, his eyes moving between the two women with obvious suspicion. "Should I be worried about what you two were discussing?" "Only if you've been misbehaving," Eleanor said sweetly. "Madison, it was lovely to meet you. I expect you both for dinner next week. And Carter," her voice dropped the sweetness, "don't screw this up. I like her." They escaped Eleanor's orbit and spent the next hour making the rounds. Madison was starting to recognize patterns in the conversations, the way people asked similar questions in slightly different ways, all trying to gauge whether the engagement was real. She and Carter had developed a rhythm, finishing each other's sentences, sharing looks that could mean anything or nothing, touching with a casualness that suggested long familiarity. By the time they left, Madison's face hurt from smiling, and her brain felt like it had been running on overdrive for hours. In the car, she let her head fall back against the seat, closing her eyes. "You were amazing tonight," Carter said quietly. "Even my grandmother likes you, and she doesn't like anyone. She knows it's fake." "What?" Madison opened her eyes, turning to look at him. "She figured it out. Or maybe you told her. Either way, she knows this isn't a real engagement." Carter was quiet for a moment. "And what did you tell her?" "The truth. That it started as an arrangement, and now I don't know what it is." "And that's the truth? You don't know what this is?" Madison met his gaze, saw something vulnerable in his eyes that he usually kept hidden. "Do you?" The moment stretched between them, tension and possibility, and something that felt dangerously close to real emotion. Carter leaned closer, his hand coming up to cup her face, in that gesture that was becoming familiar. Madison. "Mr. Whitmore, we've arrived at Miss Hayes's building." The driver's voice cut through the moment. Carter pulled back, the wall slamming back into place. "Right, of course. Good night, Madison. I'll text you about Eleanor's dinner." Madison climbed out of the car, feeling like she'd just stepped away from the edge of a cliff. She stood on the sidewalk and watched the car pull away, her heart still racing, her mind still replaying the almost kiss that had been interrupted. Upstairs, she found Claire waiting in her apartment. Madison had given her a key after moving in. Claire took one look at Madison's face and pointed to the couch. "Sit. Tell me everything, and don't leave out any details." Madison collapsed onto the couch and did exactly that, spilling every moment from the past 2 days. The gala, the photos, Victoria's hostility, Eleanor's perceptiveness, the moments in the car when the lines between fake and real kept blurring. "Maddie," Claire said when she finished, "I think you're in trouble." "I know." "No, I mean real trouble. You're falling for him." "I'm not." "Yes, you are. And unless I'm reading this completely wrong, he's falling for you too. Which means this arrangement that was supposed to be simple and businesslike is about to get very, very complicated." Madison buried her face in her hands. "What do I do?" "You have 2 choices. You can pull back, maintain professional distance, survive the 6 months, and walk away. Or," Claire paused significantly, "you can lean into it. See where this goes. Maybe this fake relationship becomes a real one. That wasn't part of the deal." "Maddie, when have you ever cared about doing things the way they're supposed to be done? You slapped a billionaire in his own office. You're clearly not someone who follows the expected path." The weeks that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Madison attended events with Carter 3 or 4 times a week. Charity dinners, business functions, Broadway opening nights, art gallery exhibitions. Each event was another performance, another opportunity to convince the world they were in love. And with each event, the performance felt less like acting and more like something real. They had dinner at Eleanor's townhouse on a rainy Tuesday. The older woman spent 3 hours grilling them both on everything from politics to their favorite books, clearly trying to determine if they were actually compatible beneath the surface arrangement. By the end of the night, she seemed cautiously optimistic, which Carter said was the equivalent of Eleanor giving her enthusiastic blessing. Madison's days were split between preparing for evening events and trying to maintain some semblance of her actual career. She'd pitched several investigative pieces to various publications, trading on her new connections to access information she never could have gotten before. The journalism world was taking her more seriously now that she was engaged to Carter Whitmore, which felt both useful and vaguely dirty. She was using him to advance her career, even if he'd essentially hired her to do exactly that. The apartment remained surreal. Madison had tried to make it feel more like home. Photos of her family on the mantel, her books on the shelves, her worn college sweatshirt draped over the back of the couch. But it still felt temporary, like she was a guest in someone else's life. Carter called her one afternoon in late October, his voice tighter than usual. "We need to talk." "Are you home?" "Yes, why?" "What's wrong?" "I'm coming over." "Don't go anywhere." He arrived 20 minutes later, still in his work suit, his tie loosened, and his hair slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. Madison had never seen him look this unsettled, and it immediately set her on edge. "What happened?" Carter paced her living room, his movements sharp and agitated. "The board met this morning. They're pleased with how things have been going. They think the engagement has shown the maturity and stability they were looking for. That's good, right? That's what we wanted. They want us to get married. Not in 6 months. Now. Within the next month." Carter finally stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "They're making it a condition of approving my long-term contract as CEO. They want to see ultimate commitment before they sign off. Madison sat down heavily on the couch. Married. Actually married. Just on paper. It would be like the engagement, just more official. We'd get a prenup that specifies everything, including an exit clause after a year. You'd get double your current monthly payment. After the year, we'd divorce quietly. You'd get a settlement, and everyone walks away clean. Except we wouldn't be pretending anymore. We'd be legally married. That's a completely different level of fake. Carter sat down across from her, his elbows on his knees. I know this is way beyond what you signed up for. If you say no, I'll understand. I'll figure out another way to handle the board. But Madison, he looked up, his gray eyes intense. I need you to know that this isn't just about the company anymore. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing how you handle yourself in situations that would terrify most people, you've become important to me, as a partner, as a friend, maybe as something more. Madison's heart hammered. Carter, just think about it. That's all I'm asking. Think about whether you can do this, whether you want to do this. I'll double your payment regardless of your answer. I'll make sure you're taken care of. But I need your answer by Friday. The board wants to announce the wedding date at the shareholders' meeting next week. He left before Madison could formulate a response, leaving her alone in the too big apartment with a decision that felt impossible. Married. Actually, legally married to Carter Whitmore, the man who infuriated her and challenged her and made her feel more alive than she had in years. The man she was dangerously close to having real feelings for, feelings that had no place in their business arrangement. Madison called Claire, who came over immediately with a bottle of wine and a determination to help Madison think through every angle. They talked until 2 a.m, making lists of pros and cons, analyzing every possible outcome, trying to determine what Madison actually wanted beneath all the practical considerations. The question isn't whether you should do it, Claire finally said, as they sat on the floor surrounded by empty wine glasses and crumpled paper. The question is, are you already in love with him? Madison was quiet for a long time. Then, barely a whisper, I think I might be. Then marry him. Marry him and spend the next year figuring out if he loves you back. If he does, maybe this fake marriage becomes real. If he doesn't, you walk away with enough money to start over anywhere you want. Either way, you'll know. And isn't knowing better than spending the rest of your life wondering what if? Madison texted Carter the next morning. We need to talk. Can you come over? He arrived within an hour, looking like he hadn't slept. Madison gestured for him to sit, then took a breath. I'll do it. I'll marry you. But I have conditions. Name them. First, the prenup has to protect both of us. I don't want people thinking I married you for money. Second, we maintain separate bedrooms. This might be legally real, but the physical aspects stay fake unless we both decide otherwise. Third, if at any point this becomes unbearable for either of us, we can end it early without penalty. And fourth, she paused, gathering courage. You have to promise to be honest with me about your feelings, about what you want, about whether this is really just business, or if there's something more happening here. Carter was quiet for a moment, then stood and crossed to where she sat. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. I promise to be honest. And here's my first honest truth, Madison Hayes. I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's real, or if we're both just caught up in the performance. But I want to find out. Over the next year, I want us to figure out what's fake and what's real. Can you do that with me? Madison looked into his eyes and saw genuine vulnerability there, genuine uncertainty. Carter Whitmore, the man who controlled everything, was admitting he didn't have all the answers. That was more terrifying and more beautiful than anything else that had happened between them. Yes, I can do that. Carter smiled, the expression soft and real, and making him look years younger. Then let's get married, Miss Hayes. The wedding was planned with the same efficiency that characterized everything in Carter's world. A small ceremony at the plaza, just close family and a few key board members. Eleanor helped Madison find a dress, a simple ivory sheath that was elegant without being overly bridal. Carter's assistant handled every detail with military precision. Madison's mother flew in from Ohio 2 days before the wedding, and the conversation that followed was one of the hardest of Madison's life. She couldn't tell her mother the truth. The contract had strict confidentiality clauses, so she had to maintain the fiction that this was a real, if rushed, engagement and wedding. Honey, are you sure about this? Her mother sat in Madison's apartment, looking around at the luxury with obvious discomfort. You've only known him for 2 months. That's so fast. I know, Mom. But when you know, right? The lie tasted bitter. Your father and I dated for 3 years before we got married, and look how that turned out. Her mother's face was sad. I just don't want you to rush into something because of other reasons. You don't need to marry rich to be successful, Madison. You're talented and smart, and this isn't about money, Mom. That part, at least, was partially true. It had started about money, but somewhere along the way, it had become about something else entirely. I care about Carter. He challenges me and sees me and makes me want to be better. Isn't that what matters? Her mother studied her for a long moment, then sighed. Just promise me you'll be careful. Rich men, powerful men, they're used to getting what they want. Don't lose yourself trying to be what he needs you to be. The words haunted Madison through the rehearsal dinner, through the sleepless night before the wedding, through the morning as stylists and makeup artists transformed her into someone who looked like she belonged in Carter's world. Claire was her only bridesmaid, stunning in a navy dress that matched Madison's old interview blazer, a private joke between them. Last chance to run, Claire whispered as they stood outside the ballroom where the ceremony would take place. Too late. I signed a contract. You signed a contract to pretend to be engaged. This is actually getting married. There's still time to... I want to do this. Madison surprised herself with how much she meant it. Fake or not, I want to see where this goes. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Carter stood at the altar in a perfect black tuxedo, his expression serious, as Madison walked down the aisle on her brother's arm. He'd flown in from his military base, still skeptical about the whole situation, but supportive in his protective older brother way. When Madison reached the altar, Carter took her hands, and she could feel them trembling slightly. He was nervous. The realization made her feel less alone in her own anxiety. The officiant spoke about love and commitment and partnership. Madison barely heard the words. She was too focused on Carter's face, on the way he was looking at her, like she was something precious and terrifying all at once. Do you, Carter James Whitmore, take Madison Ann Hayes to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was steady, certain. And do you, Madison Ann Hayes, take Carter James Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded husband? Madison took a breath, thought about everything that had led to this moment, the slap in his office, the contract, the galas and the performances, and the moments when the fake started feeling real. She thought about the year ahead, about the uncertainty and the possibility and the terrifying hope that maybe this could become something real. I do. Then, by the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Carter's hands came up to frame her face, gentle and sure. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Madison closed the distance between them, and when their lips met, She felt it all the way to her toes. The kiss was soft, sweet, and entirely too brief for something that felt like it was changing everything. When they pulled apart, the small crowd was applauding. Eleanor was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Madison's mother was crying openly. And Madison, standing there in her ivory dress with her hand in Carter's, felt like she'd just jumped off a cliff with no idea if there was water below or rocks. The reception was elegant and brief. Speeches from Harrison Caldwell about Carter's readiness to lead the company. A toast from Eleanor about finding love in unexpected places. Dancing to a string quartet, playing songs that probably cost more per minute than Madison used to make in a day. And through it all, Carter never left her side. His hand at her back, his arm around her waist, his eyes on her, with an intensity that made her wonder what he was thinking, what he was feeling, whether he was as confused and terrified and hopeful as she was. Later, when the guests had left, and they stood in the suite the hotel had provided for their wedding night, separate bedrooms as per Madison's conditions, Carter caught her hand before she could disappear into her room. Madison, Mrs. Whitmore. He tested the name, his lips curving slightly. Thank you for doing this, for taking this insane leap with me. Ask me in a year if I still think it was worth it. I intend to make sure the answer is yes. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Good night, wife. Good night, husband. Madison closed the door to her bedroom and leaned against it, her heart racing, her mind spinning. She was married. Legally, officially married to Carter Whitmore. And somehow, impossibly, she was happy about it. The months that followed the wedding blurred together. Madison and Carter maintained their separate bedrooms, but grew closer in every other way. She broke major investigative stories using her new connections. He supported her work even when it complicated his business relationships. They developed routines, learned each other's rhythms, and pretended not to notice how the fake marriage felt less fake every day. 3 months in, Carter returned from a business trip looking shattered. His father's old corruption had been discovered, money laundering that could destroy the company. Madison could have used the story to advance her career. Instead, she helped him navigate the crisis, working side by side through sleepless nights to contain the damage. Why are you helping me? Carter asked one dawn as they finalized their strategy. This isn't part of our contract. Madison looked at him, exhausted and vulnerable, and more real than she'd ever seen him. Because somewhere between the fake engagement and the fake marriage, I fell in love with you for real. And I don't think it's fake for you either. Carter stared at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her like he'd been wanting to for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. I've been in love with you since you slapped me in my office. I just didn't know how to tell you without breaking our agreement. So we tear up the contract? We tear up the contract. Carter smiled, that devastating smile that had become her favorite thing. And we start over. For real this time, no more pretending. Madison laughed, tears streaming down her face. Does this mean I'm moving into your bedroom? If you want to. Or we can stay in yours. Or we can buy a new place that's ours. Not mine or yours, but ours. He cupped her face gently. Whatever you want, Madison. As long as it's real. 6 months later, they stood on the same terrace where Carter had almost kissed her that first night after the gala. But this time, when he pulled her close and told her he loved her, there were no cameras, no audience, no performance. Just two people who'd found something real in the middle of all the pretending. So, Madison said, leaning against his chest as they watched the sunset. Was I worth the $18,000 a month? Carter laughed, the sound warm and free. You were worth infinitely more, though I should probably tell you, The board approved my permanent CEO position 4 months ago. We could have ended the arrangement then. Madison pulled back to stare at him. What? Why didn't you tell me? Because by then, I didn't want it to end. I wanted you to stay because you wanted to, not because a contract said you had to. His eyes were soft, vulnerable. So I kept quiet and hoped you'd fall in love with me before the year was up. You manipulative, impossible man. Madison shook her head, but she was smiling. I should slap you again. Please don't. Once was enough. Carter grinned, though I have to admit, it did work out pretty well for both of us. Madison laughed and pulled him down for a kiss, thinking about how a single moment of anger in an office had led to this. A real marriage, real love, a real future. Sometimes the best things in life started with the worst interviews. Eleanor Whitmore attended their second wedding, the real one, small and intimate with just family and close friends. As Madison walked down the aisle in a simple white dress, Carter's eyes filled with tears. I do, they both said, meaning it completely this time. And when Carter kissed his bride, Madison Hayes Whitmore knew that sometimes fairy tales did come true. You just had to be brave enough to slap a billionaire first. Years later, when people asked how they met, Carter and Madison would smile at each other, sharing a secret. She came in for a job interview, Carter would say, and he hired me for a position I didn't apply for, Madison would add. Best decision I ever made, Carter would finish, pulling his wife close. And Madison, surrounded by the life they'd built together, her successful journalism career, his thriving company, the family they were starting to plan, would have to agree. Getting slapped had been the worst moment of Carter Whitmore's carefully controlled life. It had also been the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to both of them. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories and check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.